No less eminent a person than Cardinal Newman said the suppression of the Society of Jesus is one of the great mysteries in the history of the Church, because there's no simple explanation to it. The reason for that is the Society of Jesus, by the 1750s, when anti-Jesuit sentiments got stirred up, were in just about every important part of Catholic Europe. We ran schools, we were confessors to kings, we were involved in sciences, we were involved in trade and missions, in political deliberations. And you also have to remember, in this period, there's no church-state separation. Ecclesial politics and the politics of the state, and even what states are, was all in flux. The modern state was still being born. Monarchs were trying to assert themselves. The Enlightenment was getting going. So it's a really messy time in Europe, a particularly complicated time. And the Society of Jesus was making a lot of prominent enemies. Way back in 1750, there was this dispute between Spain and Portugal, and there were territories in the middle of South America that Spain originally had that Portugal wanted, and the Jesuits were all in Spain, and if you've seen the mission, the reductions, and all these great Jesuit missions where the native peoples were given a lot of freedom and educated, and it was really, for its time, a very progressive social model. Well, the Portuguese weren't so hot to trot about these, to say the least. And so when Portugal took them over, the Guarani people, who were forcibly moved and subjugated, there were active rebellions. And so the first kind of nail in the coffin of the Jesuits in Portugal was the seeming complicity of the Jesuits with these Guarani revolts against the Portuguese crown. Second, in 1755, there was a catastrophic earthquake in Lisbon that killed many, many people. And at the time, they were wondering, well, why did God let this happen to the people of Portugal? And one prominent Jesuit said it was because of the sins of the Portuguese people and their government, or the sins of the Portuguese. And so, as you might imagine, if you are the government of Portugal, this is a pretty stark damnation of your rule, that God has crushed your capital but with this major earthquake. Needless to say, the government of Portugal, being accused of great sinfulness such that God needed to punish them, was less than pleased with the society. This all comes to a head, these various political agitations against the society in Portugal. But they really need a strong reason. The Jesuits were running a lot of schools, doing a lot of good work. And so there was an attempt made on the king's life. And some of the people at court posed the idea that maybe these shady Jesuits who have all this power and are suspicious of the king anyway are involved in this assassination attempt somehow. It's a rumor that gets some legs, and eventually it's used as one of the pretexts for the Society of Jesus being removed before the general suppression. In France, the reasons for the suppression are a little different. In France, there's a popular movement called the Jansenists. The Jansenists is a theological position that takes a very low opinion of human nature. At the time, they were accused of being Catholic Calvinists, whereas the Jesuits traditionally have had a very positive opinion of human nature and human goodness. There were these fights against the Jansenists in the society, where the Jansenists were accusing the Jesuits of moral laxity, and the Jesuits were accusing the Jesuits of casuistry, and all sorts of other accusations being hurled back and forth in France. And so one of the natural enemies of the society in France were these Jansenists. The Jansenists happened to be politically powerful. In the Parliament of Paris at the time, there was a strong Jansenist movement who were looking for reasons to get the society out of France. Also in the church in France, there was what was called Gallicanism, where the Jesuits, through their fourth vow, have always been strongly associated with the Pope and loyal to the Pope and have a very trans-national understanding of themselves and the church. The French church thought it should be autonomous to a large extent from Rome at the time. And certainly the French kings, and indeed most kings of the period, wanted a national church largely under their control. And this was especially true in France, but in Spain and Portugal as well, and most countries in the time, of a great emphasis in the power of the king over against the power of some transnational organization or the power of the church. So it was a threat to this Gallic understanding, and maybe even a threat to the state, according to some, that this international order with allegiance to the Pope in Rome should be operating very powerfully in their borders. Interestingly enough, non-Catholic leaders were more kind to the Jesuits in the period of the suppression, and in fact, two of them, Frederick the Great of Prussia and Catherine the Great of Russia, didn't allowed the society to be suppressed in their territories. In fact, in Russia, the society never went away. And in other places, in English colonies in America, well, they didn't act as Jesuits anymore. The former Jesuits stayed together. They kept the spirit going on. And so there was always a hopefulness through the 41 years of the suppression that the society would be restored. From the time the society was suppressed in 1773 to the time it was restored in 1814, the world changed dramatically.